Geneva, my concern is that I don't necessarily trust the government to want us to have the whole story. If you look at swine flu, and the agriculture secretary got up there and held his news conference, his primary concern was saying, don't call it swine flu, call it H1N1, and pork is safe to eat. He was so obviously a shill for the pork industry that it was completely transparent. Now, parents who are seeing their kids sick in New York City public schools, they don't want that. They want to know, where did this swine flu come from? What's ground zero? How can we stop it from happening again? What needs to change in our agricultural policies to make our food safer? We weren't getting those kinds of answers. I don't necessarily trust the government to set up a system, Geneva, that is so honest that we get the information we need as a society, especially after 8 years of the Bush administration basically melding business interests and having them supersede the interests of the public.
Well, I think we all share your concern, Jane, in terms of the government being the source of information, but I think it's really important to know what Juan has said. We all, as journalists, have this knee-jerk reaction. I don't want the government to have anything to do. The fact is the government has always had a great deal to do with distribution of information in the Postal Service, in libraries, purchasing newspapers and magazines. That's different from controlling the nature, the content of the news. And I think, to go back to this point, we really are struggling to figure out what the economic model is. The Voice of San Diego, I was just with Scott Lewis, who runs it in MIT with a number of other people in the room. And there is a consortium of these, MinnPost in the Twin Cities, the St. Louis Beacon. There are these nonprofits emerging all over the country. And I think, in fact, tax laws could make it more probable that people who want to sell an existing media organization to local philanthropic interests could do so. I think it is important to look at public policy. I don't think nonprofits are likely to supplant commercial media anytime soon. I think it's wonderful that some of our media are continuing to thrive on the old commercial model. And I think we really don't, I think we're going to see a lot of different things. We're going to understand that more and more we're going to be talking about what some people call civic media, what I like to think of as information in the public interest. We're having people aggregate. We have things like the Sunlight Foundation that is making it easier for the public to inform themselves, which I think is key. You talk about not having a filter. If I go in there and look at the data myself, I damn well don't have a filter. The Knight Foundation has funded a big alliance of investigative reporting organizations, which are nonprofits. I'm on the board of the Center for Public Integrity. We all know about ProPublica. I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting emerging models, but as Juan says, they really are struggling. The Voice of San Diego and all these others are putting together a kind of some local benevolent, benefactors who really believe that we need to have better news, some membership support. I think we're going to have to pay more as news consumers. We've trained people to believe that this quality flow of information will just come their way and advertisers will pay, but the advertising model is increasingly broken.
Well, Jonathan, let me ask you about that. The whole conundrum is that we buy a newspaper, you pay 50 cents, 75, $1.50, whatever it is, but when you go online, even I have a resentment to get that same information not free. Even if I see a commercial running before the video I'm looking up, I go, I got to wait 30 seconds. I don't have that same impatience because I'm used to it with television, although I do DVR everything, not really watching the commercials when I can help it. So how do we solve that basic conundrum of the internet seems to be more of a free model and it's people resent paying for stuff. They're finding a way to get it for free on the internet. Why do they need it in other forms that they have to pay for?
Well, I think that what you pointed out with television is interesting because I hear a lot of people complain in the industry about how stuff that people used to pay for in newspapers is free on the internet. But the reality is a pay-for-content model that partially exists in newspapers, which are heavily also earn their revenue via advertising, both classified and displays. It's a bit of a misnomer to basically just think of newspapers as something that people pay for, because so much of the revenue from newspapers comes from advertising. And when you look at the web, it's much more similar in many ways to television or radio, which are not models where people are generally used to paying to watch yourself on television or to listen to NPR or to listen to commercial radio channels. So there isn't, I don't believe, an expectation by the public and an assumption that they should always have to pay for content. And as television has increasingly, grown over the years, people increasingly have drifted away from newspapers in any case. Certainly people who were hesitant on that. At the same time, while I don't think, despite the recent talk about whether newspapers can charge for their content on the web, I don't think that there may be, that's the answer to this. I do think that there is the potential to value content in different ways. And when you look at devices like the iPhone and the Kindle, which I think most people are familiar with by now, there's some really interesting things happening there, which is people are paying for applications on here, and in some cases for content on these devices. And it's actually really promising because there is an indication that people are willing to pay for stuff. People are subscribing to the New York Times. They're subscribing to USA Today. They're subscribing to newspapers on the Kindle device. They are paying for applications on the iPhone. I've spent way too much money on the iPhone already just because it's so simple to download applications. They've made it as simple as it is to buy a song on iTunes. And so as mobile increasingly becomes a new space, that is a space where people are used to paying for both content and applications. And so there are some indications that there may be some possibilities in that realm. At the same time, the internet, while it hasn't fully supplanted the revenue being generated on the newspapers, the internet has proven in a number of different ways that revenue can be generated, both in, up until the recent economic downturn, there's been a significant amount of growth in the advertising revenue generated on the internet in record numbers in many cases. And there are some, in addition to the amazing work being done by a number of these nonprofit outfits, such as ProPublica and some of the smaller ones that Geneva and yourself have mentioned, there are some also examples of some much smaller independent organizations and sites that have cropped up that are actually making money. Because they're doing so in a couple ways. They're starting from scratch, and so they don't have the big overhead that newspapers have. They don't have the printing presses. They don't have unions. They don't have a bunch of other things. And they're able to start smaller with much lower, virtually no cost of entry, and create products that can distribute, to huge audiences very quickly. Another example of that's not a non-for-profit that has been doing great work is Josh Marshall's Talking Points memo, which helped, kind of combined a number of these things. I mean, he's basically someone who had a bit of a journalistic background, but started a blog, became very, very popular, grew a very large audience, has expanded it because it's been so successful, and now has at least a half dozen journalists or others working for him. And he and his website are basically the ones credited with helping to take the scandal of the Attorney Generals and turn that into the national story that it was. And he won a George Polk Award for that. And it's basically a blogger winning a major journalistic award. And that's not a model that is a nonprofit award, not nonprofit model. And so I think there's a bunch of different examples, and I think what Geneva was getting at is dead on. It isn't that, the answer to this is nonprofits. It isn't that the answer to this is small independent bloggers. It isn't that it's necessarily independent community sites. But in aggregate, I think there's the potential to not necessarily just, solve the economic model for newspapers, but to create a model in the future where we not only ensure that we continue the journalism that's necessary for democracy, but actually, I believe, far exceed what's ever been done in the past, in much the same way that the journalism being done today, I think quite clearly, on a mass scale, there's far more communication than there was 100 years ago, because there's so many different ways to get that information out. And so when you incorporate things like Twitter along with all of these other things, you start to get a much larger array of possibilities.